Okay, everybody. Welcome to the last chapter of the book. This is the reproductive systems. We're going to review the male and female reproductive systems. We'll note the differences in each, and we'll comment on how they function. And we're talking about the male reproductive system. The organs involved are the testes, the ducts, the glands, and supporting structures. The ducts include the epididymis, the ductus deferens, also known as the vas deferens, the ejaculatory ducts, and the urethra. Now, when we're talking about ducts, what we're talking about basically is the biological equivalent of a pipe or a hose. It's just a way to get secretions from point A to point B. The glands involved include the seminal vesicles, the prostate gland, and the bulbourethral glands, and the supporting structures include the scrotum and the penis. And here is a sagittal view of the male reproductive system. You're looking here at the lower pelvic region, and we want to make note of the bladder. Okay, this is what captures the urine as it comes through the ureters from the kidneys. The urethra. Now, in the male, the urethra has three distinct regions. There is a prostatic urethra, which runs right through this gland known as the prostate gland. There is a membranous urethra, which runs between the prostatic urethra and the penile urethra, which is enclosed entirely inside the penis, beginning here and running all the way to the end of the organ. Now, we should point out that in men, as we age, sometimes the prostate will enlarge, and if it does, it can occlude the flow of urine from the bladder to the urethra. This is dangerous because it could result in the buildup of nitrogenous wastes in the blood, which could result in azotemia, uremia, and ultimately death. So this is why it's recommended that men have a PSA exam periodically after the age of 35, and to have a digital rectal exam. Notice that the rectum and the anus are very close anatomically to the prostate gland. And so what the doctor will do is, with a gloved hand, he will palpate the prostate, feeling for any lumps, unusual growth, and that can serve as additional clinical evidence regarding the potential development of either prostatitis or prostate cancer. The PSA test is a blood test that's given for the detection of prostate-specific antigen. That's what PSA stands for, and we use that as a method of the early detection of prostate cancer. Now, other anatomical structures you want to be aware of. This is the pubic symphysis. Remember that that is an amphiarthrosis that represents the anterior articulation of the two os coxa. If you follow here the vas deferens, okay, what we want to do is take them from their origin all the way to their joining with the urethra. So if you follow here, okay, the vas deferens begins as a projection of this coiled tube called the epididymis, which lies right on top of the testes. It then runs into the body cavity and then around the pubic symphysis, behind the bladder. Okay, it joins then with the seminal vesicle and the ejaculatory duct, and then it joins the prostatic urethra within the prostate gland. Okay, the ejaculatory duct is actually what represents sort of the intersection between now the vas deferens and the urethra. So in men, there is a common passageway for semen and urine, and it is through the urethra. The penis is broken up into various parts. The prepuce is the foreskin that goes across the glans penis, which is the head of the penis. And then as we move back, there are vascularized tissues. There are two paired corpora cavernosa that lie superiorly to the urethra, and then there's a single corpus spongiosum which encloses the urethra. This runs all the way back to the root of the penis, which is just anterior to the anus. When the male becomes aroused, what happens is that these vascularized tissues will become engorged with blood. Basically, more blood will enter the corpora cavernosa and spongiosum than will leave it, and as a result, the member will become erect and ready for intercourse. Other organs that we want to point out here, we can see also the bulbourethral gland, this very tiny gland here, right next to the root of the penis. It is part of the glands that produce secretions that are found in the semen. If we want to take sort of a survey of what glands contribute to semen, we would include the testes, the bulbourethral gland, the prostate gland, and finally the seminal vesicle. Okay, all those have components that are part of semen. Semen is a mixture, obviously, of the male gamete, the sperm, and a variety of nutritive secretions that are designed to successfully introduce live sperm into the female reproductive tract. Okay, I think we've covered everything we need to talk about. Let's go on to the next section here. Let's talk about the scrotum. Here's the scrotum right here. This is the pouch that encloses the testes. Okay. The scrotum is a pouch that supports the testes, and there's a septum that separates a right and a left portion of the scrotum so that you can have a home for each testicle. Sperm require temperatures approximately 2 to 3 degrees below body temperature in order for successful sperm production, and as a result, this is why the scrotum is outside the body in the male versus in the female, the ovaries being inside the body. So what happens as a result is that the testicles are a little bit cooler than body temperature, and sperm production can continue unimpeded. In addition to this, there are muscles that can raise and lower the scrotum, either closer to the body or further from the body, depending on the outside temperature. And this allows the testes to adjust their temperature depending on the environmental temperature. The testes are paired oval glands. They sit inside the scrotum. They develop on the male embryo's posterior wall, and then they descend into the scrotum. This starts in the 7th month of life. Each testis contains about 250 lobules that have inside them a very coiled network of tubes known as the seminiferous tubules, and this is actually the site of sperm generation. It's lined with spermatogenic cells, spermatogonia, and Sertoli cells. And here is a look at the testi. Okay, so what are we looking at here? Well, let's start with something we've already discussed. The spermatic cord contains the vas deferens. It also contains blood vessels and nerves, and it leads into the epididymis, this coiled piece of tubing that sits on the posterior aspect of each testi. The epididymis is the site of chemical education of the sperm. This is where they actually learn to swim. So this is swimming school for them. And then as we extend backwards from the epididymis, so here's the epididymis, and then we roll backwards into the testes, what you see are the seminiferous tubules. This is the actual site of sperm production. Men have millions of seminiferous tubules, and we produce a vast number of sperm every day. Men are fertile from puberty until death, generally speaking, whereas women are fertile from menarche until menopause. So the reproductive age for a man is dilated. That window is dilated compared to that of the female. It's enclosed in a white fibrous capsule called the tunica albuginea. That's Latin for white jacket. And each lobule contains a length of coiled seminiferous tubule inside which sperm development occurs. These are septa that separate the coiled tubules from each other. And if we look inside a seminiferous tubule, what we find is a series of events that lead ultimately to the production of a sperm. So these are blood capillaries and connective tissue that lie outside of the seminiferous tube proper. And then as we enter the tube, this would be the area inside the tube, what we see are spermatogenic cells that are constantly dividing mitotically. So what's happening here is diploid cells are being produced in large numbers. And then what happens after that is that meiosis ensues for some of these cell products. And so they begin by producing primary spermatocytes, which are still diploid, but this is a morphogenetic change that occurs. The cells look different under the microscope. And then meiosis really kicks in, and we generate now the secondary spermatocytes, which are haploid. And then these secondary spermatocytes will develop into spermatids. Notice that the amount of cytoplasm is decreasing as we move across the developmental pathway here that you can really see in live action here in this cross section of the seminiferous tubule. And then the spermatid ultimately will differentiate into a sperm cell or spermatozoan. Now, at this point, the sperm have all the machinery available to be fertile gametes. The problem, of course, is that they're unable to swim. They aren't able to use their flagella, these long protrusions, until they make their way into the epididymis, and at this point, they are able to then actually use ATP in order to produce a whip-like motion of this protrusion that allows them to swim. They're propelled to the epididymis by smooth muscle contraction inside the seminiferous tubule, and then once chemically educated, they are either used as part of the ejaculate, or if they're not used, they are reabsorbed, broken down, and recycled. Okay, so sperm are made fresh daily, and as a result, we do not have the risk in the male gamete of a non-disjunction event because the genetic material does not stay in synapsis in tetrads for a sufficiently long period of time to form abnormal chemical bonds that won't be broken as a result of the completion of meiosis. Another very important point is that for each spermatogonium that's going to develop now haploid sperm, you get 4 haploid gametes for every primary spermatocyte. So all of the products of meiosis are utilized in the male. In the female, we're going to discover that the oogonia give rise ultimately to only 1 haploid product because of the production of polar bodies at meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. So these are propelled to the epididymis for further education, and ultimately their fate will be decided when they enter the ejaculate. Okay, so spermatogenesis has several stages: meiosis 1, meiosis 2, and spermiogenesis. These occur in the seminiferous tubules. The cell types involved include spermatogonia, Sertoli cells, and interstitial or Leydig cells. They move through the rete testis and then to the epididymis. I should point out that in the transition from spermatogonia to primary spermatocytes, these cells actually pass through a barrier inside the seminiferous tubule that seals them off from components of the circulatory system. So this is another example of a portion of the body that has immune privilege due to the fact that the formed elements of blood cannot access the lumen of the tubule. In the epididymis, what's going to happen is they're going to learn to swim as a result of chemical interactions. So let's take a look at meiosis. All of our body cells have 23 pairs of chromosomes for a total number of 46. They are paired homologs. You get 1 set of chromosomes from your mother and 1 set of chromosomes from your father. And they each have similar, although not necessarily identical, genetic material for a given chromosome. So, for instance, we were to look at your chromosome number 1 that you received from your father and your chromosome number 1 that you received from your mother, the organization of genes would be basically the same, but if you look within the genes, there might be slight differences. And that is what produces the diversity that we see in the population that's a result of sexual reproduction. The fact that we are actually a mixture of our mother and father's DNA, and in addition to that, as we're going to see in a moment, in the production of these gametes, we also shuffle the genetic deck just a bit. Gametes are haploid, meaning they only have 23 chromosomes instead of 23 pairs. These chromosomes are unpaired. Meiosis is the process whereby this division occurs, and it's required for gamete production. If we did not cut in half the amount of genetic material in the male and female gamete with each generation, what would happen is that the amount of genetic material would double, quadruple, and octuple every time we had a fertilization event. And the result eventually would be an unstable nucleus and, more importantly, a disruption in gene dosage, which can result in genetic abnormalities. And we see this in chromosomal diseases that involve the abnormal duplication in the zygote of only one chromosome, such as in trisomy 21, where the individual is born with 3 chromosome 21s instead of the normal 2. And the results are manifested in a lot of different body systems. You see a short stature, reduced cognitive ability, epicanthal folds around the eyes, simian creases on the palms, cardiovascular defects, and a shortened lifespan, just to name a few of the clinical findings that are evident in this particular disease. So you can imagine what would happen if we did it for every chromosome. It would be a disaster in terms of genetic control and in terms of our ability to properly build a human being. Okay, it takes about 70 days from first division to release to generate sperm cells. The spermatogonia divides by mitosis. One cell is designated to remain a stem cell, while the other cell differentiates into the primary spermatocyte. And at this point, it enters meiosis 1, where the chromosomes replicate. They line up as pairs of homologous chromosomes. The chromosomes then twist, and then some exchange of genetic material between homologous chromosomes can occur. What we mean by this is that portions of a paternal chromosome and a maternal chromosome can switch places. And what that does is that generates now a piece of DNA with a unique arrangement of genes that is unlike either the maternal or paternal chromosomes. So this is a special piece of DNA that is unique now to the new individual. And this is the other reason why sexual reproduction results in an increase in diversity of characteristics in the population. The benefit is that with a more diverse population, you're more likely to be able to withstand an environmental insult because you're not all carbon copies of each other as some organisms are. And the result is that some organisms will survive, some organisms will not, but ultimately the species will survive. So sexual reproduction, even though it's more complicated and requires more energy, ultimately has a greater tendency to ensure the survival of the species, human beings being one of the many sexually reproducing species on this planet. Okay, once we exchange this genetic material between chromosomes, the homologous pair will separate and a member of each of these homologous pairs will move to the opposite end of the cell. After this division, each cell is considered to be haploid. So the term that's often used to refer to this first meiotic division is the reductional division. We're cutting in half the amount of genetic material in each cell. The cells from meiosis 1 are now secondary spermatocytes. Each cell is haploid and has 2 copies of each chromatid. In meiosis 2, they divide again with 1 copy of each chromatid ending up in each new cell. And so this is called the equational division of meiosis. And the cells now are termed spermatids. In spermiogenesis, each spermatid develops into a sperm cell. This requires the support of Sertoli cells, often called nurse cells, and what they do is provide chemical instructions to the spermatids to promote now their morphogenetic change into a sperm cell. And here you can see the process of sperm generation. So again, this is a close-up of a cross-section through a seminiferous tubules, and you can see here that the spermatogonia are constantly dividing. Now, Let's just take this one spermatogonium as an example. What happens here is that one member of this mitotic division will stay home and remain a stem cell, and another member of this mitotic division will differentiate and then enter primary spermatocytehood, at which point it will engage in meiosis 1, where it goes from a haploid state, or I'm sorry, a diploid state to a haploid state. And then in meiosis 2, these haploid cells will divide once more, and the result now is 4 spermatids, which will eventually differentiate in spermiogenesis into spermatozoans, which have a head, a tail, but are still unable to swim. Now you might wonder why the cells get smaller as we progress from spermatogonia to actual spermatozoans, and the reason is that we want the male gamete to simply be an effective gene delivery vehicle. We don't want it to have to carry a lot of extra cytoplasm, because if it did, it might not make the journey all the way to the egg, which is quite far for a tiny sperm cell. So we're sort of generating now a very economical piece of biological material that will deliver only the genetic payload and nothing else into the oocyte, the egg, when it does encounter it. Okay, we make about 300 million sperm a day. The lifetime is about 48 hours in the female reproductive tract. Each sperm has a head, a middle, and a tail. The tail is the flagellum, which provides the motility for the sperm. The middle portion is the mitochondria, and it's the engine that drives the flapping of the flagella. The head contains the chromosomes and the acrosomal cap. Now, inside the acrosome are powerful enzymes that dissolve away the outer layers of the egg. And it takes the combined action of many, many sperm on a single egg in order to wear away these external barriers to eventually get one sperm to successfully penetrate the egg and effect fertilization. In addition to that, these additional sperm also help propel the egg through the female reproductive tract as a result of their mass action, their movement of their tails. And so the sperm facilitates fertilization in two ways. It eventually provides the complementary genetic material to the egg to generate now a new diploid cell. It also propels the egg to the uterus for eventual implantation and development into a new human being. And if we zoom in on a sperm cell, this is a single sperm cell, you can see the structure here. This is the acrosomal cap that contains the enzymes that will eventually digest their way through the outer layers that surround the egg. And there are several layers, and we'll get to those when we get to the female reproductive system. And then the nucleus, which contains the male genetic material. And then the middle piece here, which is lined with mitochondria, and this provides the ATP necessary to complete the journey from intromission into the female reproductive tract to encountering the egg, generally somewhere around the fimbriae of one of the oviducts. The tail is divided into the principal piece and the end piece. You can see it here, and this is what provides the motility for this particular human cell. It is the only human cell we know of in the adult that is capable of movement, going from one place to another through a liquid medium. Okay, so how do we generate the chemical signals that promote spermatogenesis? Well, the male at puberty has an increase in gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. Remember that the hypothalamus is a region of the floor of the brain that lies just on top of the pituitary gland, and it communicates with the pituitary gland using these releasing hormones. The effect on the pituitary is to increase production of LH and FSH. Now, LH has the nickname luteinizing hormone, and FSH is nicknamed follicle stimulating hormone. And what happens in the male is that the luteinizing hormone promotes the Leydig cells in the seminiferous tubules to increase their secretion of testosterone. This provides ultimately a negative feedback which suppresses the production of LH and GnRH, but at the same time promotes spermatogenesis. FSH and testosterone together stimulate spermatogenesis in the seminiferous tubules. The Sertoli cells regulate this testosterone-fueled sperm production by producing a chemical known as inhibin, which inhibits FSH release and as a result generates now optimum sperm production. So we have to control, again, this biological event. We don't want there to be too much or too little sperm production, or else we're going to decrease the efficiency of the reproductive system as a whole. And this is just showing you how these feedback loops operate. So if we begin here with the hypothalamus and the production here of gonadotropin releasing hormone, the FSH and LH levels now begin to climb. The FSH levels stimulate the Sertoli cells to produce more testosterone, and the result now is increased spermatogenesis. The luteinizing hormone stimulates testosterone secretion again from the Leydig cells. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. The FSH production stimulates the spermatogenic cells to divide. Okay, so this increases the rate of the spermatogonia mitotic division and also the rate at which they enter meiosis. The luteinizing hormone is what triggers the production of testosterone, and then it's the combined action of FSH and LH which serves to speed up even more the production of sperm cells. The byproduct of testosterone, as it's broken down in the body, is dihydrotestosterone, and what this does is it can promote male patterns of development before birth. It promotes the enlargement of male sex organs and the expression of male secondary sex characteristics, and it promotes anabolic production of protein. So this is the effect that testosterone has of increasing muscle mass and bone density in the male, in addition to red blood cell production. Now in the adult, as the male enters middle age, this buildup of DHT ultimately results in male pattern baldness in certain individuals, where the hair follicles in a very specific pattern on the cranium begin to die, and they quit making now the acellular material known as hair. Okay, so as we move on and look at androgen effects at large, in the prenatal individual, this is the male still inside his mother's uterus, the effects of androgen are to promote a male pattern of development. And what does this mean? This means that male ducts are established and female ducts are promoted to degenerate. It also promotes the descent of the testes, the development of the external genitals, and it also sexes the nervous system, so it has an effect on the function of the brain. At puberty, it promotes the enlargement of organs and the production of secondary sex characteristics, such as muscular and skeletal growth, characteristic male hair patterns on the body, and the thickening of skin. It also promotes sexual behavior, spermatogenesis, and libido, which is the desire to engage in sexual activity. And it stimulates anabolism by stimulating protein synthesis and muscle and bone growth. The route that sperm take from their development to exiting the body is very specific. We are produced in the seminiferous tubules, and from there we're propelled by smooth muscle contraction to the epididymis, where the sperm eventually learn how to swim. At that point, they enter now the vas deferens and eventually join the ejaculatory duct, which is near the seminal vesicles, and then enter the urethra in the prostate gland, pass by the bulbourethral glands, which produce an alkaline mucus-like fluid that is part of semen, and then they enter the penis and they are eventually ejaculated. The accessory glands that contribute components to semen, as we mentioned earlier, are the seminal vesicles, which produce seminal fluid, which includes fructose, which aids in the ATP production in the sperm. It also increases the pH so that we can neutralize the acid in the female reproductive tract. And it also contains prostaglandins, which chemically activate the sperm and promote the whipping of their flagella so that they can swim. The prostate surrounds the upper urethra. An increase in the volume of the prostate can add antibiotics to the semen. The secretions of the prostate increase the volume of the semen and add antibiotic components to it. So we have, again, the fuel coming primarily from the seminal vesicles. In addition to setting the pH, we have the prostaglandins, which activate the swimming action of the sperm, and then we have the prostate gland, which adds components to the sperm that increase the components of the semen that increase the semen's volume, and also adds an antibiotic component to it. The bulbourethral glands increase the alkalinity even more and add a mucousy fluid to the semen as well. And again, this is to fight the acid conditions of the female reproductive tract. And so now we have a mixture that contains the male gamete and an environment in which the male gamete can survive the changing conditions in the female reproductive tract and also generate enough energy to propel it on the journey from the vagina all the way now to the fimbriae of the oviduct. Now the penis has several portions. It contains a root, a body, and a glans. The root is the portion that's closest to the body cavity. The body of the penis runs from the root to the glans, which is the tip of the penis that is covered by the foreskin. It is a common passage for semen and urine. The urethra, because it is joined up with both the urinary bladder and the vas deferens, allows now a common exit for these two components. The root, again, is the attached portion of the penis. Inside the body of the penis are three vascular cylindrical masses. These are erectile tissue. And there are two dorsal masses of erectile tissue called the corpora cavernosa. And then there's a mid-ventral piece of erectile tissue called the corpora spongiosum, which encloses the urethra. The glans penis has an external urethral orifice, and in uncircumcised individuals, this is covered by the prepuce or the foreskin. Okay, at arousal, what happens is that parasympathetic impulses lead to a physiological response that promotes erection. This happens as a result of the dilation of penile arteries. The volume compresses as a result, so the veins do not allow the passage of blood out of the penis as rapidly as the blood is flowing in. Ejaculation is basically a sympathetic reflex. Peristaltic contractions in the vas deferens, the seminal vesicles, the ejaculatory ducts, and the prostate result in the emission of the seminal fluid from the tip of the glans penis through the urethra. There is a sphincter at the urinary bladder that closes at this point, and this results in a forceful release of the semen from the urethra. Again, so these are involuntary muscle contractions. Okay, so we'll take a brief break before we begin our discussion of the female. Okay, now we're going to delve into the female reproductive system, and it's a bit more complicated than the male reproductive system, if only for the fact that the female has to house the developing baby, and the male doesn't have any counterpart physiologically or anatomically to take care of it. And as a result, the female reproductive system not only has to produce gametes, it also has to provide an environment for fertilization and an environment for human development. And the way that the gametes are produced and the timing of the preparation of the uterus for implantation is a complicated series of events to sequence properly, and as a result, the regulation of these events requires a lot more interaction of hormones and tissues. So let's just start with the basic anatomy. The ovaries are the female gonads, so these are the female counterpart to the testes. They produce secondary oocytes, which are considered ova after fertilization. They also generate hormones, progesterone and estrogen, which help with the uterine and ovarian cycles. And they come from the same embryonic tissue in the female as the testes do in the male. The fallopian tubes and the uterus are the duct system and the housing for the developing baby, respectively. The vagina is the birth canal and is also the zone for intromission of the male genitalia during intercourse. The external organs include the vulva or pudendum, and here you're looking at a sagittal section through the female pelvic region. So let's take a brief tour through the relevant structures. Here you can see the rectum and the anus, and then as we move anteriorly, this is the vagina, this is the uterus, okay, and this structure here is the bladder. As we move forward, okay, you can see the urethra as it moves into the urinary bladder, and you can see the pubic symphysis. External anatomy includes the clitoris, which is the female counterpart to the penis, the labia majora, which is the female counterpart to the scrotum, the external urethral orifice here, and the labia minora. Up top, we can see just a little bit of the oviduct. These are the fimbriae, and those are the ovaries. This again is the pubic symphysis. This is the mons pubis, this layer of fat just anterior to the pubic symphysis. And this area here is termed the cervix, the opening here to the uterus. Other important structures include, we'll get into the histology of the uterus in a bit because that's fairly important. This is the external urethral sphincter. One of the things to notice in the female that the urethra is much shorter than in the male. This is why women are more prone to urinary tract infections than the male. And the woman has two separate openings, one for the escape of urine and one for the production of reproductive secretions, and ultimately, in the event of a successful pregnancy, the exit of the baby. So a little bit different than in the male anatomy. Notice that the female gonads are inside the body, so egg production is at its optimum at body temperature. And notice that most of the female duct system is inside the body as well. So let's take a look at the histological structure of the female reproductive system. The germinal epithelium covers the surface of the gonads in the female. These are the ovaries. The cortex is a connective tissue covering, containing the follicles. Now the follicles include the oocytes and the cells that surround them. So you can think of the follicle as an egg house, if that makes it a little bit easier to wrap your mind around. The surrounding cells nourish the oocyte, and they produce hormones that promote its development, and also that promote the female reproductive cycle, which includes the uterine cycle. It grows during maturation. The Graafian follicle is the follicle just prior to ovulation. The Graafian follicle fills with fluid called the liquor folliculi, and it's the gentle brushing of the fimbriae over these Graafian follicles that ultimately results in the rupture of the follicle and the emergence of the egg from this particular location. Post-ovulation, this follicle becomes the corpus luteum, which is actually an accessory endocrine organ that persists for the duration of the pregnancy. It generates progesterone, relaxin, and inhibin, and its job is to prepare the uterine lining for the implantation of the fertilized egg. Okay, here you can see a look at the histological structure of the ovary. You can see here the developing follicles that come from the germinal epithelium. Notice that they grow in size and then they begin to acquire fluid inside this cavity called the antrum. And then as the fluid increases in volume, what happens is that the structure of the follicle becomes compromised. Basically, the idea is that um, it's very easy now to rupture this outer layer of cells and to therefore release the egg in the act of ovulation, at which point it is sucked into the oviduct and may encounter sperm if there are any in the area. Notice that the corpus luteum forms afterwards. Okay, the corpus luteum again is going to be a temporary endocrine organ for the duration of the pregnancy, and then after it's no longer needed, after the pregnancy terminates, the corpus luteum will degenerate into the corpus albicans, which is essentially ovarian scar tissue. And so every month this happens between menarche and menopause. And as the female ages, the number of active follicles decreases. And in addition to that, the amount of hormone that the ovary is capable of producing declines as well. And at menopause, when the last follicle releases its egg, you see a significant decline in the production of female sex steroids from these organs, and as a result, very often women have to undergo hormone replacement therapy in order to maintain now the previous levels of hormones. If this isn't done, there can be disruption of a lot of different physiological functions in the female. One of the most readily identifiable is the onset of osteoporosis. The estrogens and progesterones do help maintain bone density. Okay, so this happens monthly from menarche to menopause. Generally speaking, menarche begins in the late preteen years for most females, and menopause occurs between the ages of 30 to 35 for most females, but there are notable exceptions to that time window. Okay, so as we move forward, oogenesis is actually a process that begins before the female is born. She's still inside her mother's womb. The oocytes are not continuously produced. Meiosis I has its start before birth and then it finishes at puberty. During fetal development, these form the oogonia, which are, again, the stem cells that produce the female gamete. Before birth, some of these will differentiate into primary oocytes, and then the monthly cycling of the female sex hormones causes a certain number of these primary oocytes to complete meiosis I. The result of this is two uneven haploid cells, a secondary oocyte and a first polar body, which is then discarded and is not ultimately part of the production of the gametes. The secondary oocyte has lost most of its cytosol. It then begins meiosis II, and then it'll stop. It will hold at meiosis II until ovulation, at which point it'll enter the uterine tube. If fertilization occurs, then meiosis II will complete. This will result now in a finished ovum and the production of a second polar body. So the net production of gametes from a single oogonia is one ovum. So there's far fewer gametes produced in the female than in the male over the course of a lifetime. In addition to that, take special note of the fact that the secondary oocyte will pause at meiosis II with the genetic material exchange between homologous chromosomes until ovulation occurs. And what this means is that each egg that is ovulated by the female is going to be older than the egg that was ovulated the previous month. So this has a consequence. This means that certain gametes in the female will be produced at a very advanced age. And it's been shown that the older the female gamete is, the greater the likelihood of a non-disjunction event, basically an unusual occurrence where two chromosomes will not properly separate during meiosis, and the result can be the production of a gamete that has either too many or too few chromosomes, and this is a condition called aneuploidy. These products, if they are fertilized by a sperm, will result in an individual that has an aneuploid number of chromosomes, and this can manifest itself in a variety of genetic diseases. The way that we detect this prior to birth is through amniocentesis, or if we want to detect this event even earlier, we can perform chorionic villus sampling. In both these cases, material is taken from the developing infant. In chorionic villus sampling, a portion of the chorion, which is the stalk that connects the embryo to the placenta, is removed, and the cells are then treated in such a fashion as to cause them to release their chromosomal content, at which point we can do a chromosome count. In amniocentesis, we sample the amniotic fluid, which contains cells that are sloughed off of the developing baby during its normal course of development, and then we can treat those cells the same way as we treat the chorionic villus sampled cells, and look again at the number of chromosomes present. And that'll tell us whether or not the proper number of chromosomes exists in the developing fetus. Now, we can also detect defective genes using a different procedure, one called PCR. This stands for polymerase chain reaction, and it's a series of chemical reactions that allow us to take biological samples and specifically amplify very tiny regions of DNA, the genetic material, that are thought to potentially contain a defective gene. We can take this amplified DNA and then we can sequence it, and we can see whether or not the developing embryo has the defective gene or not. All of this can be used in the process of genetic counseling. We can inform the couples of the status of their child with regard to chromosome abnormalities or the presence of defective genes, and then the couples can use that information to make a decision regarding completion of the pregnancy or preparation for a child that may have any of a long series of possible genetic disorders. But at any rate, it's quite a bit more information than we used to be able to provide prospective parents. Okay. Now, at fertilization, what happens is the male and female gamete unite. This is fertilization. When this occurs, when the sperm manages to penetrate these outer layers of the egg, which include the corona radiata and the egg cell membrane, what happens is that a single sperm will be allowed to introduce its genetic material to the egg, and the result now will be a diploid cell, which now has all the requirements necessary to create a new individual. So this is really where new life begins. It begins when these nuclei unite, and the immediate outcome of the production of this diploid zygote is the rapid division of this new cell in an effort to generate a new human being. Okay, so at this point now, we have created a diploid cell. We have all the genetic material in place to make a new human being, and the result, hopefully, is a successful pregnancy. And so here we're looking at the series of events that runs from the production of the oogonia all the way to the production of an ovum and a zygote. So the oogonia will again divide. Certain oogonia will then be promoted to become primary oocytes. there's a certain number of these that are promoted on a monthly basis, usually about 2 dozen or so. And of those 2 dozen, only one is permitted to enter meiosis and form a secondary oocyte. The rest are eliminated through a process called atresia, so they're basically thrown away. And the secondary oocyte will then be ovulated. The secondary oocyte, when it's created, there's a first polar body that does not form any gametes, and the secondary oocyte now eventually will become here the egg that's going to be fertilized by the sperm. So the secondary oocyte enters and it completes meiosis II at fertilization. So the minute that ovulation and fertilization occur, we very rapidly complete the final division of genetic material that leads to a bona fide ovum, and then the sperm and the egg cell nucleus will unite. There will be a second polar body formed and discarded, and then we now have a new diploid zygote which can form a brand new unique human being, one that has a genetic composition unlike either the mother or the father, although it'll be similar in many respects. And again, the reason for this diversity is because of two factors. One, there is a unique combination of male and female genetic material that happens at fertilization, and in addition to that, during sperm and egg production, there is a rearrangement of genetic material on homologous chromosomes as a result of synapsis and exchange of homologous genetic material, which creates, again, a unique arrangement of DNA on a single molecule. All right, so let's look at the duct system for a bit. The uterine tubes are paired. They extend laterally from the uterus. They end in a fringe called the fimbriae, which sweep the secondary oocyte into the tube at ovulation. It's actually this sweeping action as it rubs across the Graafian follicle that helps it to rupture and release the egg. Now, once the egg is released, it's actually cloaked in a follicle cell layer called the corona radiata. The oocyte is moved by cilia that line the wall of the female oviduct, but it's also its union with multiple sperm that help to propel it along the oviduct and ultimately make it to the uterus, usually in about a week. It's the combined action of the acrosomal enzymes on this oocyte that eventually will pierce the corona radiata and eventually the egg cell membrane, resulting again in the union of the sperm and the egg cell nucleus. Okay, the uterus is the pathway for sperm and also the site of implantation of the fertilized zygote. The fundus is the dome-shaped area above the uterine tubes, and the body is the tapering central portion of the uterus. The cervix is the narrow opening into the vagina, and the uterine cavity is the interior of the body of the uterus. This is where the developing embryo will ultimately undergo all the very complicated morphogenetic changes that produce unique organs, tissues, organ systems, and a unique, eventually, organism. The vagina extends from the exterior of the female's body up to the cervix. It has receptacles for the penis and an outlet for menstrual flow. So it's a two-way opening, right? It also provides an avenue for the exit of the baby. Okay, this is the birth canal as well. The fornix is a recess that surrounds the cervix, and there's also an acid environment that prevents bacterial growth. There is a smooth muscular layer, which is the middle layer of the uterus that adjusts for intercourse or for birth, and a thin membrane or fold which can cover the vaginal orifice known as the hymen. And so here is the uterus and vagina. This picture is a little bit misleading because it gives you the impression that the uterus is standing upright and the fallopian tubes are projecting straight laterally. It turns out that if you look again at the previous slide showing you the cross-section of the female pelvic region, that the uterus is actually leaning forward with the fallopian tubes projecting backwards and almost touching the ovaries on the lateral posterior part of the pelvic body wall. So just in terms of visualizing this for yourself, imagine that this portion is tilted forward, this portion is tilted back, and these guys are projecting backwards and almost touching the ovary. Now, another thing I want you to notice about these structures is that the ovary and the oviducts are not a closed system, and as a result, occasionally at ovulation, the egg can fail to enter one of the two oviducts and can potentially implant inside the abdominal pelvic cavity of the female. In the event that this implantation was fertilized, it'll begin to develop just as it would inside the uterus as it searches out a blood supply. But obviously, the abdominal pelvic cavity is not designed to host a full-term pregnancy, and so this can represent a medical emergency for both the mother and the child. In recent years, the technology for detecting these ectopic pregnancies, ectopic means an event in a region that you don't expect it, has improved quite a bit, and we're able to rescue a lot of these ectopic implantations and put them into the uterus proper, and there have been successful pregnancies from these interventions. So that's, to me, nothing short of a miracle. You can see here the fimbriae. This is the oviduct. This is the ovary. And the oviduct leads into the uterus proper. There is the fundus. There is the body. This is the cervix. Okay. And this is the vaginal opening. There is an internal and an external os. The internal os opens into the body of the uterus. The external os opens into the vaginal canal. Other important components to note, there are a series of ligaments that hold this structure in place along the lateral posterior body wall. They are the broad ligament, this large piece of connective tissue here that borders the inferior margin of the oviducts and extends downward to the pelvic floor. There is a ovarian ligament which attaches the ovary to the lateral margin of the uterus. And there are two other ligaments, a uterosacral ligament that runs from the uterus to the sacrum, and another ligament indicated here, which also serves to stabilize the uterus and the fallopian tubes against the body wall. I'll come up with the name of that ligament in just a moment. This may be the uterosacral ligament right here. Okay, so broad ligament, ovarian ligament, uterosacral ligament. Uterosacral ligament runs from the sacrum to the uterus. So there's also a round ligament. This guy down here, I believe, is the round ligament, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, this is posterior view, just so that you're aware. So we're looking from the back to the front. Okay, the perineum is a diamond-shaped area between the thigh and the buttocks of males and females. The vulva or pudendum is the external genitalia, while the mons pubis in the female is an elevation of adipose tissue that is anterior to the pubic symphysis. The labia majora extends back from the mons pubis, and it's made of the same fetal tissue as the scrotum in the male, while the labia minora is internal to the labia majora. The clitoris is a small cylindrical mass of erectile tissue and nerves that is similar to the penis in the male. As such, it contains a prepuce and a gland and erectile tissue in a similar arrangement to the male penis. The vestibule lies between the labia minora. The external urethral orifice is anterior to the vaginal orifice. The periurethral glands lie on either side of the urethra, and they're made up of the same embryonic tissue as the prostate gland in the male. They secrete mucus. The greater vestibular glands add to this mucus, and they come from the same embryological material as the bulbourethral glands in the male. Remember, those were at the root of the penis, and they contributed components to the semen. And so here we can see the perineum and the vulva. Again, this is inferior view looking up. There's the anal opening. There is the hymen. This is the external urethral orifice, and this is the vaginal orifice. Okay, so 3 openings: anus, vaginal orifice, and urethral opening. The labia minora here are spread to show that they are highly vascularized and they lack hair. The labia majora here are spread. Notice that they are also vascularized, but they are covered with pubic hair. This is the prepuce of the clitoris. The clitoris is difficult to see here, but it is basically at the top of the labia majora where the 2 lips meet. Okay, labia is again a anatomical term for lip. Okay, the mammary glands are modified sweat glands, and they produce milk for the nourishment of the baby. The nipple is a pigmented projection with openings surrounding it. The areola supports the nipple. Internally, we count about 15 to 20 lobes inside a normal human breast. These are divided into lobules, which are composed of alveoli, which produce milk. These are the milk-secreting glands. They mature at puberty, and as a result, the breast will enlarge. Lactation is the synthesis, secretion, and ejection of milk from the breast. And here you can see the breast in sagittal section and in a cutaway anterior section. Notice that you have, again, the ribs and the intercostals here, and then above this you have the pectoralis minor, and then you have the fat that actually makes up most of the volume of the typical female breast. This is adipose tissue, and then there are suspensory ligaments that hold the breast in place. And then as we look into the actual portion of the breast that produces the milk, you can see that there are milk ducts leading to alveoli that actually secrete the milk. They exit always at the nipple, which is surrounded by the areola. And here you can see these same structures in anterior view. Okay, so the musculature lies behind the breast is anterior, and this is how we provide nourishment for the developing baby. This is why we are among a group of organisms called mammals, because the baby receives nourishment as a result of the productions of the mammary glands. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the female reproductive cycle. It lasts a little over a month or so. It is not. It has a regular periodicity, but it can vary between 24 and 34 days, and this is because hormonal secretions can vary from moment to moment in the female and also between individuals. So you can't rigidly say that a particular portion of the reproductive cycle will run exactly so many days and no more or no fewer because of these physiological variations. They involve both the ovaries and the uterus. The ovarian cycle involves the maturation of the follicle and ovulation and the formation of the corpus luteum. The uterine cycle involves the menstrual cycle, which is controlled by hormones that are secreted by the ovary. Estrogens promote the growth of the endometrium, which is the inner lining of the ovary, the part that's closest to the lumen of the ovary that will contain the baby eventually. And progesterone supports the endometrium for implantation. The combination of these cycles is termed the reproductive cycle. And what you're looking at here is a comparison of the events that take place in both the ovary and the uterus. And we can begin here with the ovarian cycle, notice that we begin with growing follicles. This actually happens, this early portion happens while the female is still inside her mother's womb. These follicles then mature and are promoted now to primary oocytes, and then periodically a certain subpopulation of these primary oocytes are promoted to secondary oocytes with the onset of puberty. Now, there are secretions that come from the pituitary that control this, FSH and LH being the two major ones. What follicle stimulating hormone does is it promotes the maturation of these follicles, the accumulation of fluid in the antrum, and ultimately the formation of the mature follicle, which will then ovulate as a result of its interaction with the fimbriae of the lateral edge of the oviduct. At ovulation, what happens now is the egg is sucked into the female oviduct, and the follicle that remains behind becomes the corpus luteum under the influence of luteinizing hormone. And the corpus luteum, as you'll see, produces progesterone and estrogens, and these help to thicken and maintain the uterine lining for the implantation and the duration that are involved in the pregnancy. Once they're no longer needed, the uterine lining no longer receives the progesterone and estrogens from the corpus luteum. When the chorion, which produces human chorionic gonadotropin, which helps maintain this organ, once it is no longer a viable structure, the corpus luteum will devolve into the corpus albicans, which no longer produces the hormones necessary to maintain the uterine lining. At that point, the uterine lining is lost, and we begin the next cycle. If we look at the uterine cycle, what happens at menstruation is that the endometrium is lost, and with it you have a lot of blood loss. And then what happens under the influence of circulating levels of estrogens is that the uterine lining begins to thicken, okay? And it continues thickening and hypertrophying under the influence of progesterones and estrogens that now come from the corpus luteum. At which point, hopefully, we implant if we have a successful pregnancy, and then we develop to term, and then at that point, during the birth process, the chorion is no longer a viable organ. The endometrial lining will devolve, and the baby will be expelled, followed with the placenta, the afterbirth. And then a new reproductive cycle can begin. Okay, so it's important that the uterine lining be adequately vascularized and filled with nutrients prior to implantation of what will be a fertilized egg. Otherwise, there won't be any method to get nutrients to the developing baby. So this is why this process actually begins prior to fertilization. Okay. If we look at the circulating levels of hormones, what you can see is that these levels of hormones stay essentially static, with the exception that the estrogens begin a slow rise. And then eventually what happens is that this promotes an increase in the secretion of both luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, and it's this surge that actually just precedes the ovulation event. Now, once the ovulation event has occurred, we have the formation here of the corpus luteum, which secretes now progesterone and estrogens, and this helps to thicken the uterine lining and prepare now the uterus for the implantation of the embryo. Okay, so this is the cycle that repeats about every month, approximately. Now, again, these are averages. They can vary a little bit from individual to individual. Okay. Gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus promotes the production of FSH and LH from the pituitary. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulates follicle growth and estrogen secretion. These high estrogen levels lead to a luteinizing hormone surge, from the anterior pituitary, which will eventually result in ovulation. Luteinizing hormone supports the corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum then produces progesterone and estrogen, as well as relaxin and inhibin as part of its endocrine contribution to these cycles. The inhibin eventually results in decreased follicle stimulating hormone release, and the reason for this is that we don't want another follicle to develop while we have an active corpus luteum in the ovary doing its work. Otherwise, you're going to have a follicle that could potentially ovulate, and there would be no way to properly prepare the uterus for this this ovulation. There wouldn't be anywhere for it to go. The likelihood is that it wouldn't lead to a successful pregnancy. So it's important, once this series of secretions begins, that we also put a halt now to the production of a new egg from either ovary until either the ovum is not fertilized and passes out with the menstrual flow, or the end of a successful pregnancy occurs. Okay, estrogen development and maintenance of reproductive structures and secondary characteristics. This is another a very important role for these steroid hormones, not simply the maintenance of the uterine and the ovarian cycles, but also the secondary sex characteristics that go into what we traditionally visualize as the body plan for the typical male or female. In the female, it's estrogen and progesterone that have the upper hand in terms of steroid hormone concentration, and as a result, they have the major influence over the development of the female body structures. They promote protein synthesis and growth, they lower blood cholesterol, and they also contribute to the development of female secondary sex characteristics. Examples being breast development, the widening of the hips, and the characteristic female pattern of body hair distribution. Progesterone maintains the myometrium for implantation, and relaxin relaxes the uterus and inhibits the myometrium. The myometrium is the smooth muscle layer of the uterus, and it contracts in response to the production of oxytocin, which is from the posterior pituitary. Inhibin also inhibits FSH release, and the result of that is that another follicle will not be promoted to the status of Graafian and then ovulation until the first follicle, its product, has either been fertilized and implanted or has been released from the body. Okay, so the menstrual phase of the uterine cycle is the first 5 days. Several ovarian follicles will enlarge. Decreased progesterone and estrogen production results in a constriction of the uterine arteries, and the endometrium will then slough off. In the pre-ovulatory phase, this lies between menstruation and ovulation. The ovaries and the follicles grow, and they begin to secrete increasing levels of estrogen and inhibin. One follicle will eventually dominate. The uterus will then begin growing a new endometrial lining. At ovulation, we will have release of the secondary oocyte concomitant with a luteinizing hormone surge. In the post-ovulatory phase, the follicle will collapse and will form the corpus luteum, and this begins the luteal phase. If there is no fertilization, there will be a decrease in follicle-stimulating hormone production and luteinizing hormone production, which will lead to the degeneration of the corpus luteum into the corpus albicans, and the result will be decreased progesterone production, which will then lead to menstruation. If fertilization does occur, there will be implantation in the uterus, and then the chorion, which connects the developing embryo to the placenta, will produce human chorionic gonadotropin. This will stimulate the corpus luteum, and it will continue to secrete progesterone and estrogens to maintain the uterine lining and to allow the pregnancy to complete properly. Here you can see a look at the hormonal interactions that are involved with ovulation and with the uterine cycle. Again, this is a nice summary slide. You can take a look in the diagram in your book to get an idea of what we're trying to show here. Basically, the green lines will promote the production of the target. So these are positive feedback loops here, whereas the dotted red lines are inhibitory effects on the target organ. This is the anterior, this is the posterior pituitary. This is showing you the events in the ovarian cycle, while this is showing you the events in the uterine cycle. Okay, now what happens as we age? Well, as we age, the operation of the endocrine system in a synchronous fashion begins to decline. At puberty, we have pulses of LH and FSH that signal a rise in sex steroid production from the gonads. As a result, we see growth and secondary sex characteristics beginning to emerge and the beginning of the female reproductive cycle. When the follicles become exhausted in the female will enter menopause. Now, estrogen secretion declines because there aren't as many follicles to produce the hormone. As a result, we lose feedback on the pituitary, which normally produces high amounts of FSH and LH. The decline in estrogen-supported functions results in not only a cessation of the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle, but also other body systems are affected. You see, for instance, early onset osteoporosis, reduced red blood cell production, reduced muscle mass, reduced overall biosynthesis, and as a result, there's a reduced ability to recover from disease and injury. Okay, wound healing is slowed as well. In males, you see a slower decline of function, primarily because of the power of testosterone in this mix. Testosterone is a potent stimulator of anabolic activity. Increase in lean muscle mass and bone density are just two of the factors, in addition to erythropoiesis. But in males, just as in females, the primary sex hormone, which in this case is testosterone, does decline with age, and the result eventually is a diminishing of male secondary sex characteristics and a decline into senescence and ultimately death. Now, I'm going to put a video on to the end of this that actually talks about human development. It'll show you an extremely unusual case, the case of Brooke Greenberg, who is a child who is not aged physiologically or psychologically since infancy. She represents a unique case in human biology. There are only a few other recorded cases that seem to have a similar syndrome, but she does not appear to be growing at the normal rate, and we do not know yet what the biological defect is in her case, but I do think it's a fascinating little news story. If you're interested in sort of investigating this case a little further, Google Brooke Greenberg. She has her own Wikipedia page, and this will tell you a little bit about her particular case. And then I've also got a real nice summary of human development that goes from fertilization all the way to birth and normal development in a week-by-week fashion that I will tack onto this as well. So it'll make for, I think, a very interesting perspective on what happens after implantation. You get to see how the sperm and the egg interact, how the developing zygote divides and differentiates, and how the establishment of organ systems occurs. So with that said, I will see all of you this coming Tuesday. and I've already got the practice final posted, so make sure and download that, take it, and see how you do. And if you have any questions, be sure to contact me either by email or cell phone. And it's been wonderful. Hope to see you guys again real soon, and I wish you the best of luck on your exam. Thank you.
To understand the various ways that medical science can assist reproduction, it is important to understand how the reproductive system functions in both sexes, because the cause of infertility often lies equally with both men and women. The main players in the female reproductive cycle are the pituitary gland, the ovaries, and the uterus. Their activities are closely coordinated. Each month, one or other ovary releases a single egg, an event known as ovulation. It is brought about by a series of complex interactions between the pituitary gland, the ovaries, and the uterus. The pituitary gland is itself under the control of this small area of the brain known as the hypothalamus. A new menstrual cycle begins when the nerve cells of this center secrete a hormone called gonadotrophin-releasing hormone, GnRH, into the network of blood vessels which surrounds the pituitary gland. Stimulated by pulses of gonadotrophin-releasing hormone, cells in the pituitary gland secrete another hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH. FSH travels in the bloodstream, reaching the ovaries. There it stimulates the formation and growth of an ovarian follicle in one or other ovary. The follicle consists of an egg, a number of surrounding cells which secrete estrogen hormones, and fluid. FSH helps the egg to mature and prepares it for release. As the follicle matures, the hypothalamus increases secretion of GnRH. This in turn stimulates the pituitary to secrete a second hormone which acts on the ovary. This is luteinizing hormone, or LH. Toward the middle of the cycle, there is a sudden peak in the blood level of LH. This acts as the trigger for ovulation. Within minutes of its release, the egg is guided by suction through the fringed opening of the outer end of the fallopian tube, starting it on a journey which will take 5 or 6 days as it passes down the tube and finally reaches the cavity of the uterus. Meanwhile, after the follicle ruptures, it is converted into this yellowish body known as the corpus luteum. Cells of the corpus luteum secrete the hormone progesterone, which brings about important changes in the lining of the uterus, preparing it for possible pregnancy. In fact, the lining of the uterus, known as the endometrium, undergoes changes in response to hormone levels during the cycle. In the first half of the cycle, known as the follicular phase, the developing follicle secretes increasing amounts of estrogen hormone, which encourages regeneration of the endometrium. After ovulation, there are important changes in the endometrium, aimed at making it suitable to receive a fertilized egg. These changes are brought about by a secretion of progesterone from the corpus luteum. The secretion of progesterone is maintained for several days, but if the egg is not fertilized in that time, the corpus luteum withers, and falling levels of progesterone and estrogen trigger the shedding of the uterine lining as the menstrual flow. The cycle then starts again. But if the egg is fertilized, no menstruation occurs, as the corpus luteum continues to function, secreting progesterone during the first 3 months of the pregnancy. Thereafter, numerous changes occur to support the developing embryo.
Whether you really want to make a baby or are petrified that you're pregnant, your first step will most likely involve taking a home pregnancy test.
To get the most accurate result on a home pregnancy test, it helps to know how the test works and when you should take it. Quite simply, a home pregnancy test detects the presence of a hormone in your urine called human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. HCG is a pregnancy hormone that a woman's body starts producing when a fertilized egg implants in her uterus. In most women, this implantation and subsequent HCG production occurs up to 6 days after sperm and egg meet. Because of this, many women will get the most accurate result if they take the home pregnancy test a full week after their missed period. Although many tests claim that they are 99% accurate as soon as the first day your period is due or earlier. That's because some technically pregnant women may not have experienced implantation by this day in their cycle. Plus, the amount of HCG that a woman makes may be so minute at first that a home pregnancy test won't be sensitive enough to detect it. When you do take your home pregnancy test, you'll get the best results if you test first thing in the morning when your urine is the most concentrated. Since tests work in various ways, make sure to read the instructions and pick the one you think will work best for you. Whatever the test results say, you should still take another pregnancy test in a few days to confirm. This is partly because of the extremely unlikely chance that your test will say you're pregnant when you're actually not. This false positive result can occur if you had a miscarriage or abortion in the past 8 weeks or if you're taking certain fertility drugs. More common are false negative results where the test says you're baby-free when you're actually pregnant. False negatives are often the result of taking a pregnancy test too early or not following the test directions. Additionally, you could get a false negative if you drink a great deal of water pre-test, in turn diluting the amount of HCG in your urine. If you do get a positive result, make an appointment with your doctor to confirm the pregnancy. Your physician will probably take a blood test to measure HCG in more minute amounts than the home pregnancy tests are able to. Your doctor may also confirm your pregnancy with a sonogram. If you are indeed pregnant, prenatal care should begin right away.
In the beginning, you won't even know you're expecting yet. Meanwhile, your baby will be busy moving in.
The beginning of pregnancy may be confusing. After all, the first week is medically just your menstrual period. Calculation of gestational age depends on a number of factors and generally assumes a 28-day menstrual cycle length. Because your baby's expected delivery date is determined from the first day of your last period, this week counts as part of your 40-week pregnancy, even though your baby hasn't even been conceived yet. This will happen during the end of week 2, again assuming a 28-day cycle length, when one of your ovaries will release a ripe egg, which will pass into a fallopian tube. There, your egg will wait for 12 to 24 hours for the arrival of one of your partner's tens of millions of sperm. After the sperm arrives in your fallopian tube, it will combine with your egg and merge into a fertilized egg or zygote. It's interesting to note that it is the sperm that carries the chromosome that determines sex. At this point, the zygote sex has been determined by either a male Y chromosome or a female X chromosome. At this point, your little zygote will begin the journey from fallopian tube to uterus. As it travels, the zygote will divide until it becomes a mass of 16 identical cells, which, upon reaching the uterus, is called a morula. The morula fills up with what will become amniotic fluid and changes monikers yet again. You are now carrying a blastocyst. Near the end of your 3rd week after the first day of your last menstrual period, the blastocyst will attach itself to the endometrium or the lining of your uterus. This process is called implantation and creates an essential connection between you and your baby. The endometrium will eventually develop into what will sustain your baby throughout the pregnancy, the placenta. But in the meantime, this lining will provide nutrients and remove wastes for the blastocyst. The newly implanted pregnancy produces HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, which tells your ovaries to stop releasing eggs and triggers the production of estrogen and progesterone. HCG is the chemical which shows up in your urine to turn a pregnancy test positive, so if you test at this point, you may already see a positive result. Congratulations, mom-to-be! The end of this 3rd week marks the official beginning of your pregnancy journey.
You probably just found out that you're pregnant, and now you want to know what your little baby is up to.
Even though you didn't know you were pregnant, your baby has been growing since the moment of conception. By now, your baby is an embryo the size of a poppy seed. That's 10,000 times as big as she was at conception. The embryo now has distinct layers that will eventually develop into your baby's organs and body parts. All around your baby, a support system is coming into place. Your placenta is actively developing now. In fact, placental cells are actually tunneling into the lining of your uterus, creating a way for your blood flow to supply the placenta with the nutrients and oxygen that the placenta will then provide to your growing baby. 3 other key parts of your baby support system are also now present. The amniotic sac, which will surround and house your baby for the next 9 months. The amniotic fluid, which is inside the amniotic sac and protects and supports your baby, and the yolk sac that is delivering nutrients to your baby while your placenta, which will eventually produce your baby's red blood cells, forms. Check back in the next week for your baby's development video update.
If you were to see your little one this week, you might think you were growing a tadpole, not a baby in there.
Don't worry though, it's normal for your embryo to look more like a fish than a human this week. In fact, where before your embryo was a mass of cells, that tadpole form is your little one's first actual shape. And speaking of little, by now the embryo is about the size of a sesame seed. But don't let a small stature fool you. Your embryo has officially developed 3 layers. The outermost, the ectoderm, is forming the beginnings of a neural tube which will become your baby's brain, spinal cord, nerves, and backbone. The middle layer, or mesoderm, is busy developing a heart and circulatory system. That little heart will divide into chambers and even begin to beat and pump blood this week. Meanwhile, your embryo's inner layer, called the endoderm, will eventually house organs like lungs and intestines. In addition, your baby's placenta will also begin to develop now, and it is through the placenta and finger-like structures called villi that your embryo will receive nourishment during your pregnancy. For more on your little one's development, check back in your 6th week.
Exciting news! Your embryo's heartbeat is detectable now.
As a matter of fact, the average neonatal heart rate is 130 to 160 beats per minute. That's about twice as fast as the average adult's resting heart rate. By the end of your embryo's 6th week, it will be about the size of a lentil bean. Dark marks visible on your baby's face are the optic vessels, which will later become eyes, as well as the beginning of nostrils. Your embryo has also developed small depressions on the side of the head, which will become ears. Equally exciting are the growth of 4 teeny buds, which will eventually become your baby's arms and legs. Plus, your embryo's digestive tract and the bud of tissue that will become lungs have both appeared. What a week! Check back in 7 days for the next installment of your baby's developing body.
This week, your embryo is making some important connections.
By this week, your embryo's umbilical cord, which will connect the 2 of you throughout your pregnancy, has fully formed. The umbilical cord will provide oxygen and nourishment to your little one, as well as dispose of all waste. A few days after your baby is born, the umbilical cord will fall off, leaving an indentation in the abdomen that we call the belly button. Your embryo has doubled in size from last week. It's now about the size of a blueberry. And remember those arm and leg buds? They'll sprout the beginnings of paddle-like arms and feet this week. Your baby's brain is also bulging as both hemispheres begin to form. And by the 7th week, the embryo also has a pancreas, liver, and an appendix. Last but not least, your embryo has developed eyelid folds, which will partially cover teeny eyes that already have some color. Check back in the next week to see what your busy baby has in store for the end of your 2nd month.
Can't wait to kiss every one of those tiny fingers and toes? Well, they're beginning to emerge out of your baby's hands and feet this week.
In addition to the development of 20 digits, your 8-week-old baby's body continues to get ever bigger. Your little baby is now about the size of a kidney bean. By now, the buds that will develop into your baby's genitals have also begun forming, but don't ask the sex of your little one just yet. An ultrasound won't be able to detect the genitals for at least another 10 weeks. In other news, your baby's intestines are developing quickly. They're so large, in fact, that there isn't enough room for them in your baby's abdomen. As a result, the intestines will protrude into the umbilical cord for up to a few more weeks. Your baby's brain is also growing, in functionality, that is. Nerve cells in that tiny brain are now beginning to branch out and connect, forming basic neural pathways. Keep up to date on your little one's fascinating journey by checking back next week for the latest installment about your baby's progress.
In the early stages of your pregnancy, your baby's head develops more quickly than the rest of the body, making your embryo appear quite top-heavy.
At this point, your embryo's facial features are becoming more distinctive by the day. The eyes are fully formed now, though they're still fused shut. And earlobes, nose, nostrils, and mouth have all begun to form. By the end of this week, your embryo will measure 2/3 of an inch and weigh just a fraction of an ounce. In other words, that baby in your belly is about the size of a grape. Also changing this week is your baby's heart, which will finish splitting into 4 chambers and begin to form valves. Tiny baby teeth buds also start developing, as do internal reproductive organs like testes or ovaries. Your embryo's other systems and organs are all essentially present and accounted for by now, though they will of course continue developing. And the news in terms of your placenta is that it is now mature enough to fully support the developing pregnancy, which means it can produce hormones as well as feed your baby. What a busy few days for you and your little one. For more video updates, check back next week.
Congratulations are in order for your little one this week. After all, your future baby has completed the most crucial part of development.
Week 10 of your pregnancy marks the end of the embryonic stage, which means your baby has shed that tadpole-like appearance and has started to look much more human. Although your embryo won't be considered a fetus until next week, this is now considered the fetal period of development. Still, your future baby is pretty tiny. Most 10-week embryos are only about 1 inch in diameter, or the size of a cherry tomato. That little body now holds all of your future baby's organs, which are starting to work together. Your embryo's liver is churning out red blood cells, which will replace the diminishing yolk sac. And if you're having a boy, his testes will start producing testosterone this week. Your baby is growing tooth buds and the beginning of fingernails. These newly formed limbs can now bend just like yours do. In fact, your baby's hands are probably flexed at the wrist, while his or her feet may be long enough to meet in front of the belly. Check back during week 11 to get the updated progress report on your little one's development.
Week 11 is a more quiet one for your baby, but it marks the official graduation from embryo to fetus.
Your little fetus is busy learning to move in the womb this week and is starting to kick and stretch up a storm. In addition, your little guy or gal is probably beginning to hiccup now that the diaphragm is fully formed. You won't feel any of these movements for another month or more, but it's little wonder when you consider your baby's size. This week, your little one is about 1.5 to 2 inches in diameter, about the size of a fig. But the next 10 weeks will begin such rapid growth that the placenta will begin producing extra red blood cells to meet your baby's nutrient needs. In addition, some of your fetus's bones are beginning to mineralize, or harden, this week. While it's been a slow few days, your baby is just prepping for the massive growth ahead in the upcoming busy weeks. To learn about them, check back for your weekly video update.
This week is a big one for your fetus, as your little one learns what it means to respond reflexively.
As those reflexes develop, your baby's tiny hands will open and close, toes will curl, eyelids will clench, and that small mouth will begin to suck. In fact, if you gently prod your abdomen now, your little one will squirm, although you still won't be able to feel his or her response. Equally exciting this week is the official functioning of your baby's kidneys. As your baby swallows nutrient-rich amniotic fluid, those kidneys will convert it to urine, which will be sent to the bladder. And your fetus grows to slightly more than 2 inches by the end of week 12, meaning that your future baby is now officially the size of a small lime. This growth means that your fetus's intestines, which previously protruded into the umbilical cord, can now begin to move back into the abdomen. In addition, vocal cords are now fully developed this week, which incidentally is the last week of your first trimester. To see what's up for the beginning of your second trimester, check back next week for your latest video update.
Your little one can probably put that tiny thumb in his or her mouth this week.
Although those sucking muscles won't be quite up to the task of doing much with that thumb, your little one will likely take comfort in just having that thumb in his or her mouth. This week your baby is about 3 inches long, the size of a clementine. And with this growth, your fetus's large head is finally becoming more proportionate to the size of the rest of the body. Although you still won't know the sex of your child, if you're having a girl, her ovaries will now be home to more than 2 million eggs. In other news, your baby's most distinctive characteristic, fingerprints, have fully formed on the fingers and toes. Want to know what's up with your 14-week-old fetus? Check back in a few days for your next video update.
Your fetus shed that fish-like tail a few weeks ago, but now begins to sprout a coating of downy fur.
This ultrafine layer of hair, which is called lanugo, will continue to grow throughout the rest of your pregnancy until it is shed shortly before birth. Meanwhile, your baby's body is growing significantly faster than the head at this point, which sits atop a more prominent neck. This week, that ever-growing fetus is about the size of a peach, or 3.5 inches long, and now weighs about 1.5 ounces. By now, your baby's arms are proportionate to the body, although the legs still have some growing to do. And while you still can't see them just yet, your baby's genitals have fully formed by this week. In addition, the liver has started to produce bile, and the thyroid gland will begin to make thyroid hormones that will regulate metabolism. Wonder what else your little one has in store? Check back next week to get your next video update.
If you happen to have an ultrasound in the 15th week, you just may discover your baby's sex.
Those mature sex organs of your fetus may be proudly on display at this week's ultrasound, but don't be concerned if they aren't. Some babies rest curled up or turned away from the ultrasound's line of sight. Whatever your fetus's gender, however, it's now about the size of an apple, weighing in at 2.5 ounces and measuring 4 inches. That lanugo that began sprouting last week continues growing, as does the hair on your baby's head and eyebrows. Despite this soft coating of fur, your fetus's skin remains translucent, so if you could look inside your stomach now, you'd be able to see blood vessels. Your baby continues to practice breathing, inhaling amniotic fluid through the nose and respiratory tract. And if you're looking for a fun activity this week, try shining a light on your belly. Although your fetus's eyelids are still fused shut, he or she can sense light now and will shy away from the beam. Want more? Get your baby's 16-week video update right here next week.
Though you can't see them yet, your little one is busy practicing facial expressions this week.
Your fetus owes this new ability to smile, frown, and squint to facial muscles that have recently developed, and that expressive face is housed in a head that can be held fairly erect by week 16. Meanwhile, your baby's heart is busy pumping, moving about 25 quarts of blood each and every day. Your baby is now about 4.5 inches long and weighs 3.5 ounces. In other words, about the size of an avocado. This development means that your fetus's legs are now almost proportionate to that growing body. In fact, all this growing may mean you'll soon be able to feel a quickening, the faint first movements of your baby. But if your abdomen remains movement-free, don't worry, some women don't feel their baby's first fluttery kicks until week 20. Want to know more? Check back right here for your next video update.
Your fetus's body is continually developing. Here's what's happening this week.
The placenta, which nourishes your fetus and also removes waste, is ever growing to accommodate your baby's needs. It now contains thousands of blood vessels, which bring life-giving oxygen and nutrients to your little one. Plus, the umbilical cord, which is your baby's lifeline to the placenta, is growing stronger and thicker. Your baby's umbilical cord contains 2 arteries and 1 vein surrounded by a white, thick gel called Wharton's jelly. Your fetus weighs about 5 ounces and measures 5 inches now, making your little one the size of a sweet potato. Interestingly, your baby's bones have started to ossify, which means that they change from what was previously soft cartilage to what will become hard bone. Some of the first bones to ossify are those in the clavicles and the legs. Plus, your baby's sweat glands are forming now, and your little one's joints are now fully active and moving. To see what your fetus is up to next week, check back for a brand new video update.
You better start brushing up on your storytelling and song singing this week, because your baby may just be listening.
Now that your baby's ears have moved to their final position on the head, the bones of the middle ear and auditory nerve endings from the brain are developing. This means that your fetus will probably be able to hear sounds like your heartbeat and blood rushing through the umbilical cord. At this point, your little one may even be startled by a sudden loud noise. And if you haven't yet done so, you'll probably start to feel those butterfly kicks of surprise, as well as some more strident jabs this week. From crown to rump, your ever-growing baby will measure about 5.5 inches long and weigh 7 ounces, about the size of a bell pepper. As the brain continues to develop, a protective insulating coat of myelin has also begun to grow around your baby's nerves, a process that will continue through your baby's first year. This is why many pregnant women are advised to supplement with omega-3 essential fatty acids, so talk to your practitioner about what is right for you. For more on your little one's development, check back during your 19th week.
Your baby is experiencing some serious sensory action this week as the brain develops specialized areas for each of the 5 senses.
Aside from the sensory explosion, your baby begins to grow a white waxy skin coating this week. Called vernix caseosa, this coating ensures your fetus's delicate skin doesn't become scratched or pickled in its bed of amniotic fluid. If your baby arrives prematurely, he or she may still be coated with an entire layer of vernix, although most babies will shed much of this pre-birth. In addition, this week brings about the development of brown fat, which will help keep your fetus warm after birth. About now, your baby is the size of a large heirloom tomato, weighing about 8.5 ounces and measuring 6 inches. In other news, your little one is essentially proportional now, from the legs to the arms to the head. The organs are well developed and become easier to view sonographically. Your fetus's kidneys continue to make urine, and the mini lungs continue to breathe amniotic fluid. For more on your little one's developmental progress, get your weekly play-by-play right here.
Congratulations, Mom-to-be! You're halfway through your pregnancy and your baby continues to grow, grow, grow.
At this point, you may notice that the top of your uterus, the fundus, is about level with your belly button. In baby news, your little one will be less bent over, so from now on we will measure size from head to toe instead of from head to rump. And this week's head to toe measurement is about 10 inches, or the length of a banana. Your baby is also about 10.5 to 11 ounces now. These days, your little one is swallowing more amniotic fluid, which is great practice for your fetus's developing digestive system. And your baby has also started producing meconium, a black, sticky, tar-like stool composed of materials ingested while in utero like mucus, amniotic fluid, bile, and epithelial cells. Because it accumulates in the bowels, you'll notice meconium in your baby's first diaper, though your baby may even pass some during birth. Check back in next week to see what your busy baby has in store.
Your fetus still relies on you for most things, but this week your baby will start to learn a whole new lesson in self-reliance.
Although your baby still gets most of his or her nourishment directly from you via the placenta, your little one's intestines have further developed and your baby will begin absorbing small amounts of sugar from the amniotic fluid. During week 21, your ever-growing fetus weighs about 3/4 of a pound and is comparable to a carrot's 10.5 inches in length. If you're having a little girl, her vaginal canal will start to form this week. And no matter your fetus's sex, his or her bone marrow spaces are now developed enough to start making red blood cells. Previously, this was done by your baby's liver and spleen, but both of these organs will retire red blood cell production in the coming weeks. Phew! If you think this week was interesting, check back to see the surprises that wait in week 22.
This week, your fetus will begin to discover its sense of touch.
Because your baby's brain and nerve endings are almost fully formed, he or she will begin experimenting with this newfound sense. As such, an ultrasound may show your baby stroking his face, sucking her thumb, or feeling other body parts. And now that your fetus is 11 inches long and has officially hit the 1-pound mark, he'll really start to look like a person this week. Of course, he's still covered with that downy coating of lanugo, and he also sports deep wrinkles of skin on his body. But don't worry, before your fetus is ready to be born, he'll shed that fur and will also fill in the wrinkles with oh so pinchable baby fat. In other developments, a baby girl's vagina is almost fully formed now, while a boy's testes will begin to descend this week. And deep within your baby's belly, the pancreas continues to grow and get ready to produce vital hormones. Want to know more? Check back right here for your weekly fetal development update.
Can you believe that just a few weeks ago you could barely make out your baby's fluttery movements?
By now, there's no doubt that you'll feel your little martial artist as he or she kicks, squirms, and somersaults in your belly. In fact, you'll be so attuned to your little one's movements that you'll know your fetus's sleep-wake schedules. This can be frustrating if they're different from your own, but just look at this as great practice for your baby's eventual arrival. The reason it's so easy to feel your fetus now is that your baby is much bigger. In fact, your little one weighs in at about 1 pound. And as your baby grows, he continues to prepare for the real world with ever keener senses. In particular, your fetus's hearing will allow him to discern loud, disruptive noises like the dog barking or the vacuum cleaner. Exposure to these sounds in the womb will mean that your baby will unlikely be fazed by them once he arrives, which is good news for you. For more on your baby's impressive development, check back right here for your weekly video update.
You probably won't know whether your little one is floating upside down or right side up, but as of this week, your baby sure will.
As the development of the inner ear becomes complete, this important component of the vestibular system enhances the baby's sense of movement and position. In addition, your rapidly growing fetus has gained 4 ounces since last week, and he's now about the length of an ear of corn. While your baby is in utero, he receives oxygen through your placenta, but you both know that won't always be the case. To prepare for the work of taking in oxygen once he's born, your baby's lungs are beginning to produce surfactant. Surfactant is a substance that keeps the air sacs in the lungs from collapsing or sticking together during breathing. In addition, your fetus's brain and taste buds are continuing to grow and develop during your 24th week. To see what's in store for your baby's continued development, check back next week for your newest video update.
Week 25 is a period of continued growth for your baby.
Your fetus will continue to make his or her presence known with kicks and jabs, which you may notice most at night. If your fetus is prone to sleeping the most during your day, it's because the movements of your active body are soothing. Your baby's grown a full 1.5 inches since last week and now measures in at about 13.5 inches. He's bigger too, and that 1.5 pound frame can be compared to the size of a rutabaga. And while your baby has been covered with downy lanugo for some time, he'll start growing additional hair on that little head this week. To find out what week 26 brings, check back right here for your next video update.
As your delivery date draws ever closer, your baby will be focusing on getting nice and plump for the big day.
Sure, your fetus still looks a bit wrinkly, but that booming baby is almost 2 full pounds by his 26th week and should measure somewhere around 14 inches from crown to rump, which is about the size of an English hothouse cucumber. Your fetus continues to practice for life outside the womb, inhaling and exhaling small amounts of your amniotic fluid. That little heart keeps beating a strong rhythm, which you may be able to hear with just a basic stethoscope now. Plus, the nerve pathways in your baby's ears continue to develop, and you may notice that your baby frequently jumps at loud sounds. Interesting to note, the baby also responds to strong vibrations like the bass at rock concerts. If you're not already doing so, make a point to talk to your baby from here on out and encourage your partner to follow suit. After all, your voices are one of the first things your little one will recognize outside the womb. Check back next week to see what your baby has in store for the start of your third trimester.
Welcome to the end of your second trimester. You're nearing the home stretch in your 40-week pregnancy.
By now, your baby looks very similar to the way he'll appear at birth, albeit thinner and smaller. And although your little one's lungs and immune system still need to fully mature, if your baby were to be born now, though not ideal, chances are that with special neonatal care, your little one would probably be okay. Of course, you want that baby to stay safe and warm inside you for a few more weeks. After all, your little one is only about 14.5 inches and a bit bigger than 2 pounds, rather like a head of cauliflower. And while your baby continues to grow inside you, your little one is probably sleeping and waking at regular intervals. You may notice occasional rhythmic movements in your belly during waking hours, which are just normal cases of baby hiccups. Although your fetus's eyes have been fused shut up to now, the retina, or light-sensitive portion, has begun to mature. The result? Your baby's eyes will open in the next week or so, and will be able to see what's going on in the world of the womb. Excited to know what happens next? Check back for your 28th week update.
Do you know what a Chinese cabbage looks like? You'll want to find out, as this vegetable has something in common with your fetus this week.
It's true, your rapidly developing baby hits the 2-pound, 2-ounce mark this week and weighs roughly the same as this little-known cabbage. In addition, your little one measures 14.8 inches from head to heels, or 10 inches from crown to rump. At your next prenatal appointment, it's possible to tell by palpating the belly whether your baby is lying head first or feet first in your womb. Babies who are in the breech or bottom first position have almost 3 months left to turn around, and most fetuses do. Some babies may remain in the breech position and may need to be delivered via C-section. In other news, your baby's eyes are open and blinking now. In fact, your baby may sense light filtering through your stomach. Plus, that little brain is ever expanding, developing billions of tiny neurons in preparation for life outside the womb. Want to know what will happen at the beginning of your 6th month? You know where to turn for next week's facts.
Your baby's calcium requirements increase in the 3rd trimester. Your little one will soak up 250 milligrams every day.
Calcium is deposited in your baby's ever-hardening skeleton. This nutrient is so vital that your baby will leach calcium from your bones if you don't meet calcium demands with your food intake. Foods like broccoli and other cruciferous vegetables, whole sesame seeds, and dairy are good sources of this important nutrient. If you don't think you're getting enough in your diet, talk to your clinician about supplementation. All of this bone development should mean a continuous increase in kicks, jabs, and even little punches this week. If you notice a decrease in movement, however, your doctor or midwife will recommend counting your baby's movements. A healthy fetus should be moving at least 10 times per hour. Your baby continues to grow during your 29th week, weighing in at a butternut squash's 2.5 pounds and measuring 15 inches from tip to toe. Additionally, those muscles, lungs, and immune system continue to mature during this week. Want to know what's next on your baby's development schedule? Check back right here for your 30th week video update.
Once your fetus resembled a tadpole, then a monkey, then a wrinkly old person. But now your fetus looks like a real chubby-cheeked baby.
Your baby continues to put on layers of fat this week, which helps contribute to your baby's more human appearance. Your little one's still growing and weighs about 3 pounds at this point. Picture a head of cabbage and you'll get the idea. About a pint of amniotic fluid surrounds your baby now, although that amount will continue to decrease as your little one grows. Your baby is now quite aware of your internal surroundings. Your little one is now blinking and listening to sounds in both his liquid environment and the exterior one that awaits him. In preparation for birth, your baby continues to practice breathing, swallowing, and, by sucking on that thumb, nursing. Baby teeth are all fully formed under the gums, and eyesight continues to develop. As such, premature babies born now have about a 9 in 10 chance of surviving and thriving. For more on your little one's continuing development, get your 31st week video update right here.
One of your baby's activities at 31 weeks? Releasing several cups of urine into his or her amniotic fluid each day.
This may sound a little weird to you. After all, your little one also swallows amniotic fluid to make that urine. But don't worry, your baby's liquid home is fully replaced several times a day. In fact, your doctor or midwife will measure your levels of amniotic fluid during any ultrasounds. An excess of fluid, called polyhydramnios, may mean that your baby isn't swallowing properly or that he or she is experiencing a gastrointestinal obstruction. Too little fluid, or oligohydramnios, meanwhile could indicate a problem with the kidneys or urinary tract. Luckily, these conditions are fairly rare. In other baby news, your little one is preparing for a last major growth spurt before birth. This week, your baby measures 16 inches and weighs about 3.3 pounds, about the weight of 4 navel oranges. Your little one is continuing to put on fat, the skin is becoming smoother, and he or she is probably kicking up a storm. If these acrobatic antics keep you up at night, take heart. An active baby is a healthy baby. This is also an opportunity to prepare yourself for your baby's natural rhythms. Check back in next week for your baby development video update.
Holy weight gain! By now you're putting on about a pound a week, and you'll continue to do so until your little one is born.
Don't worry too much about gaining weight. At least half of that is going directly to your little one, as well as to the developing placenta and increasing amniotic fluid volume. In fact, your fetus will gain a third to half of his birth weight during the remaining weeks of your pregnancy. By now, your baby weighs about 3.75 pounds, rather like a good-sized cantaloupe. Your baby is also between 16 and 17 inches. This week, eyelashes, eyebrows, and a full head of hair, or at least a showing of peach fuzz, are making an appearance on your fetus. Your little one also has toenails, fingernails, and the buds of tiny teeth under his gums. Yes, you've got a real little person in there who will be out to meet you before you know it. To get your next video developmental update, you know where to come next week.
In the final weeks leading up to delivery, your baby's brain is using those billions of neurons to learn about that in utero environment he or she lives in.
Your baby can listen, feel, and even see, although your little one's eyesight is hardly what you'd call impressive. Most babies in utero can see at only about 20/400 as compared to an adult's perfect 20/20 vision. This means that your baby can only make out objects right in front of his or her face, and that fuzzy eyesight won't improve until some weeks post-birth. By your 33rd week, your baby should weigh a little over 4 pounds, about the same as a normal pineapple, and will probably be longer than 17 inches. As your baby's bones continue to incorporate calcium, they mineralize and harden. The bones in the skull will eventually fuse, but at this stage in development, suture lines allow the bones to move and even overlap, making it easier for your baby to fit through the birth canal. In fact, until your baby reaches 12 to 18 months of age, the soft spots, called fontanelles, in the front and back of the skull remain open, allowing brain and other tissue to expand. Want more? Come back to visit for the 34th week of pregnancy update.
Good news for moms concerned about preterm labor. Most babies born from here on out do just fine.
In other happy news, your baby has likely turned head down with the head against your pubic bone, which is the most common presentation for delivery. Most 34-week-old fetuses measure about 18 inches and weigh 5 pounds or so. Picture a cantaloupe and you've got the idea. The layers of baby fat that your little one is putting on now will help regulate body temperature post-birth. If you peered into your uterus this week, you'd see that your baby's coating of lanugo, or warm fur, is almost completely gone. Meanwhile, the vernix on the skin is thicker. Vernix is a white, waxy substance which protects your baby's skin and keeps it from looking like he just got out of the bath. Your baby's central nervous system and lungs continue to mature in preparation for birth, which is now just around the corner. To find out what happens next, check back for your weekly video update.
Forget those somersaults. These days, your big baby barely has room to move in your crowded uterus.
As a result of cramped quarters, you may notice that the fetal movements you can feel decrease slightly, although your little one is still probably kicking and squirming. By your 35th week, your baby has hit the 5-pound, 5-ounce mark and is about 18 inches long. Because delivery is so close now, most of your fetus's development is complete. In fact, the kidneys are fully functioning and making urine, and the liver can process some waste products. As a result, this week begins your fetus's most rapid final bout of weight gain, probably putting on about 8 to 12 ounces per week until birth. The fat deposits will be placed all over the body, especially around the shoulders. Want to know what comes next? Check back to find out what happens during your final month of pregnancy.
Having some trouble walking this week? That's because your baby has dropped further down towards your birth canal in preparation for delivery.
This dropping process is known as lightening, and it's likely that you'll feel a lot lighter as a result. To further prepare for birth, your little one is most likely head down in your uterus now. If this is not the case, you may be a candidate for an external cephalic version, which is manual manipulation of your baby from the outside to turn him or her head first. Because the head first or vertex position is least likely to be associated with complications during a vaginal delivery, many babies who are not head first may benefit from delivery by C-section. This week, your baby weighs in at just under 6 pounds and measures more than 18.5 inches long. Your baby continues to shed lanugo and some vernix, both of which are swallowed along with other bodily secretions in utero. This mixture will make up a tarry blackish mixture known as meconium, or your baby's first bowel movement. To see what's up for the end of your last trimester, check back next week for your latest video update.
Congratulations, Mom! Although your due date is still 3 weeks away, your baby is officially considered full term in your 37th week.
This means that if your little one were born today, the lungs would be mature enough to adjust to life outside the womb without medical assistance. Babies born prior to this week are considered premature, and those that arrive after the 41st week are called post-term. Your now full-term baby weighs about 6 1/3 pounds and is about the length of a stalk of Swiss chard, 19 inches or so. Your baby will continue to put on weight at a slower rate of about 1 ounce a day until birth. Boys tend to be a bit bigger at birth than girls are, and first-time babies may be smaller than those born to seasoned moms. Just a couple more weeks to go. To find out what happens during each, check back here for your video updates.
Welcome to the waiting game. Your next several weeks will probably be just that, as you wonder when your baby will arrive.
Up to now, your baby has been very busy plumping up, but that weight gain will begin to taper off during your 38th week. This week, your no longer little one weighs more than 6.5 pounds and measures in at 19.5 inches, the length of an average pineapple. By now, your baby can grasp firmly, and that's one of the first skills you'll notice when your little one emerges from the womb and finds your fingers. If you're having a boy, his testicles will be fully descended, and if you're giving birth to a girl, her labia are completely formed now. All other systems and organs are a go and are ready to work outside your womb. To find out what your baby does in those final weeks in your belly, check back next week.
You're probably spending most of your waking hours imagining greeting your little one face to face at last.
What will your baby look like? There's no way to tell. For example, many dark-haired parents give birth to fair-headed babies and vice versa. Meanwhile, your baby's eyes may not show their true colors until your baby is about 6 months old, staying the same slate gray-blue color they were at birth. That's because a baby's irises gain pigment during the first 6 months of life, making some lighter colored eyes turn darker green or brown. But for now, your baby is still in your belly and probably measures about 20 inches and weighs about 7 pounds, the size of a small watermelon. Most of the lanugo has disappeared from your baby's body, although he may be born with a fine coating of hair on his back or shoulders. Much of the vernix has vanished as well, although again you'll notice some of this waxy white moisturizer at birth. Just a few more days to go, Mom. Hang in there and check back to find out what happens during your last week or two.
Congratulations, your baby is here. Or not. If you're like 95% of women, you won't deliver on your due date.
In fact, many first-time mothers find themselves waiting up to 2 weeks post-due date to deliver. Don't worry about it too much. A late baby is just taking some extra time to finish up important growth and development. Although it's hard to say for sure how big your baby will be, most 40-week-olds are about 7.5 pounds, or the size of a small pumpkin. Additionally, a baby of this age will be about 20 inches long. Don't expect your child to look perfect at first. Many babies are born with cone-shaped heads as a result of their trip down the birth canal. Delicate newborn skin may be red or covered in rashes, dry patches, or skin discolorations. All are normal and will calm down in a few weeks. If you're still waiting to give birth, you know where to come next week to see what's going on in your belly.
If you're still pregnant, you probably can't wait to have your baby already.
Relax. There's a very good chance that you'll go into labor at any time in a natural way during this, your 41st week. If you don't, your practitioner may talk to you about inducing labor. Although about 5% of pregnancies extend 3 or more weeks past the due date, most doctors won't let pregnancies last this long. That's because a prolonged post-dates pregnancy and labor can lead to an increased risk of complications for both mother and baby. Babies born a bit later may have dry, almost parchment-like skin and may be quite overweight. In fact, even now, at your 41st week, your baby is 20 inches long and about 8 pounds in weight. He's a big boy, or she's a big girl, and that baby is very, very ready to meet you.
Congratulations, you're pregnant. But how will you know when to expect your bundle of joy?
Once your pregnancy has been confirmed, what you most want to know is your due date. Luckily, calculating your baby's due date is pretty easy to do at home. The average length of a pregnancy is 40 weeks, or 280 days from the first day of the last menstrual period, or LMP. Calculating the due date, or expected date of delivery for a pregnancy is quite simple then, if you know that date. Simply add 9 months and 7 days to the date and you've got your pregnancy due date. Here's an example of how it works. Say the first day of the last normal menstrual period was February 1st. Add 7 days to that number and you get February 8th. Add 9 months and you get November. The expected due date of that pregnancy then is November 8th. Many factors play into determining the exact day you may have conceived. If your cycle length is irregular, you may not be able to use the first day of your last menstrual period as a marker. And similarly, if you have no idea when your last period was, don't worry. In these types of circumstances, your doctor will likely use an early ultrasound to measure the fetus's size and thus determine its gestational age. You may be wondering why you use your period and not the day you conceived the baby as a starting point. This is because it's rarely possible to gauge the precise day that you got pregnant. After all, your ovulation schedule may be unpredictable and sperm can live inside you for a few days. Remember, though, that your baby's estimated due date is just that, an estimate. In fact, only 5% of babies make their debut on the exact day predicted for their birth. So don't worry if your baby is born before or after that big X on your calendar.
Imagine being frozen in time, a baby forever. It certainly sounds impossible, but it describes Brooke Greenberg.
The Baltimore County girl may look like a baby, but she's actually 12 years old. 11 News reporter Kate Amara has her family's incredible story.
That was 2 years ago when
In most respects, Brooke Greenberg looks and acts like your average 6-month-old baby.
she loves to be moving at all times.
She's 13 pounds and 27 inches long.
The older she gets, the more unbelievable it gets. You just look at her and you just give in. Everybody wants to hold her.
She literally is the fountain of youth, if you think about it.
And when Brooke goes in for a hug, she holds on tight.
Brooke is clearly just love.
But this little girl is 12 years old. She doesn't age. She's a medical mystery.
It's just amazing that you could have a child for the last 6 or 7 years that has not mentally or physically developed at all.
She looks exactly the same as the last time we visited her, 4 years ago. Brooke has not put on 1 pound, has not grown 1 inch. Her syndrome remains undiagnosed and unnamed. And as far as doctors can tell, Brooke is the only one in the world who has it.
Brooke has always been baffling. She's always been a puzzle.
Lawrence Bakula has been her doctor since the day she was born.
On her height and weight, she's maybe somewhere between 6 and 12 months. If you ask, any physician who knows nothing about her, immediate response is that, she's maybe a handicapped 2-year-old.
Brooke's body may not be aging, but her health is deteriorating. She's fed through a tube. She's had strokes, seizures, tumors, ulcers, and severe respiratory problems.
At one point, they actually told us to go. She had 48 hours to go get a casket for her.
But the 4 times Brooke has come dangerously close to death, she's bounced back, and no one knows why.
And we were wondering when we were going to bury our child. It was horrible. Now we believe that she will outlive us.
Don't have a lot of answers, but do always continue to have new questions with Brooke.
Dr. Pakula points out her strong sense of self and of sibling rivalry. No language, but she has acquired motor skills over the years. She can pull herself up in her crib. She can scoot across the kitchen floor.
When one sees how much she has accomplished and how much she has done, how aware she is of the world, it is a tremendous reminder that even for a person who's limited, that there still is a wonderful world out there.
As genetic research expands, scientists may be able to learn the secrets of this amazing little girl. But until then, it's Brooke doing the teaching.
She's shown me that. As hard as it gets sometimes, the next day it only can get better.
Right.
That's what she's here for.
Just keep her happy, day to day, and see what tomorrow brings.
And more likely than not, that day will include a big smile and lots of big hugs. In Baltimore County, I'm Kate Amara, WBAL TV 11 News.
By the way, Dr. Pakula says Brooke has thrived because of the support of her parents and 3 sisters.